Hey, I'm Dan from RB Leaguers, and this is Reels on Wheels. I'm really excited to be kicking off my Reels on Wheels movie club with the first ever movie of the week, No Country for Old Men. Before I get into that, for those of you who don't know what the movie club is, and that's probably most of you since it's brand new, it's sort of like a book club, but with movies. I'll be picking one movie a week to watch and deep dive into. I'll let you know in advance what it is, so hopefully you can watch it too or give it a rewatch if you've already seen it. And I will follow up with my thoughts on the film on the following Movie Monday. If you want to know more about this, why I'm doing this, you can check out the blog post up on rbleaguers.com. So like I said, the movie of the week, the first ever movie of the week, the inaugural film, I chose No Country for Old Men, the Coen Brothers 2007 neo-Western crime thriller. I chose this movie not only because it's critically acclaimed, considered one of the best movies of its generation, but also because we want to tie in these movies as much as possible with our travels around the country. And last week, we made our way into Texas from New Mexico. We traveled through Western Texas, and that inspired me to look into Texas film. When you look at Texas film and filmmakers who make movies about Texas or they're from Texas, a few names come up several times, including Joel and Ethan Coen, collectively known as the Coen Brothers. And this movie made perfect sense to me as a first film because not only is it a Texas-based classic, it also happens to be on Netflix, which makes it easy for a lot of people to watch. And it's a movie I've wanted to see ever since it came out, but I just happened not to get around to it. I think I'm not the only one who has movies like this. You want to see it. A year goes by, you didn't see it in the year it came out. You didn't see it when it came out on DVD back in the day. It came out in 2007, so DVD. You didn't see it another year passed. 12 years passed, still haven't seen it. So I've always wanted to see this movie. It worked out perfectly. The confluence of factors of being a Texas film, a critically acclaimed film, and being readily available on Netflix made it the perfect choice. Before I get into my discussion of No Country for Old Men, I just want to say thanks for being interested in this first ever Reels on Wheels movie club, movie of the week discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. It's my first time doing something like this, so I think over time it will probably change. Hopefully we can get into a discussion about these movies and I can see what your takes are on these movies, and I'll get a little better, I think, at analyzing the movies because I'm not a movie expert. I think part of this is to learn more about film, and I'm hoping that we can do that together. So again, thanks so much for checking this out. And without further ado, let's just dive right into No Country for Old Men. So first, I think I'll give my overall impressions of the film, whether I liked it or not, and then I'll dive in with my thoughts about it. First of all, I didn't really have a lot of expectations going in to the movie other than I assumed it would be good. Best Picture winner, like I said, critically acclaimed. I didn't watch the trailer for the movie in advance, even though I put it in the blog post about this, because I like to go into films with as little information as possible just to see it kind of cold turkey and get that full experience. I knew Javier Bardem was in it, that he was the star. Obviously, I think he's the most iconic actor or the most iconic role from this movie, so I knew that, but I'll honestly say that I didn't know he was the villain even. It's been 12 years since the film came out. I've never seen it. Even though it's a very well-known film, it's obviously not one that's being talked about so much in the media anymore that people are revealing things about it or spoiling it. But I had only very vague expectations that the film would be good. So I can say that I did enjoy the film. I think it's a great film. However, I don't think it's a great film because it's constantly paying off for the audience in the sense that it's not just a bunch of service to your expectations of what a Western should be like. It's not like a film where, oh, great, I'll watch my hero from the beginning and he's a badass and he's amazing and he's so cool and then he'll defeat the bad guy in the end, even if the bad guy is really tough. It's not great because of that. In fact, probably the points of the film that I enjoyed least, just objectively, meaning sitting there, I'm being entertained by this, were the points where it made its most deliberate, impactful subversion of general expectations. And I'll get into that a little later. But you know that at the end, it does not resolve in the way you would expect it to. There's no big showdown. Those parts end up not being entertaining in the sense of a popcorn film entertaining where I'm going to see the big shootout, I'm going to see the big ending. But I think what elevates this film is those deliberate choices to subvert your expectations, to tell the audience its message, regardless of whether it's going to shock the audience and take them out of the general entertainment aspects of what you'd expect in this kind of a film. To wrap up my general impressions of this, I will say I'm giving it a thumbs up, a go see it, or not go see it, watch it on Netflix, stream it, whatever. So now let's dive into the film a little bit more specifically. from the very beginning, I was completely drawn to this film from the very outset. Those opening, establishing shots of the setting in Western Texas with Tommy Lee Jones' character, Ed Tom Bell, the sheriff, giving this narration, immediately gives you a sense of what this film is going to be about. We have the Western Texas setting set up, and I can say from having just done this drive, this is the second time I've driven in my life from New Mexico all the way to Central Texas. And I can say West Texas is as pictured. There is a lot of empty open space. It really feels like the Wild West. You can see why it could kind of have this atmosphere of this classic Western, lawless, the one lawman, the sheriff who has to kind of keep order, and these notions of justice by gunfight or duel or any of these types of trappings that you see in these Western films. They really do a good job of just setting that up immediately with several establishing shots of showing the landscape and how empty it is, other than maybe a windmill here and or a little barn here. And you have the narration again of the sheriff. I think the narration is super important. Not only is he telling his own history, he's one of the three main characters in the film whose stories we follow, but the narration tells you something about what this film is about. He's telling you the story of his family. There are many lawmen in his family. His father was a sheriff, but he's not just saying that about his personal history. He's also saying that about the country, the West Texas country itself. Some of these lawmen didn't even carry guns. What would they think about the way the days are now? And I think it's kind of telling you just from the get-go, this is a story about the past being bygone. The past is the past. It was a different time, at least from his perspective. It was almost like a more innocent time where you could have these classic Western stories where the hero wins in an epic duel, epic showdown. But now there's just more crime, depravity. He can't even wrap his head around it. He just tells the story about this criminal who just killed because he wanted to. And you can tell that he's grappling with this change and kind of unable to comprehend it. And then we're immediately thrust into the story. We see Anton Chigurh, our villain, who is a perfect representation of how much the world has changed. The same thing that Sheriff Ed Tom Bell is telling us in the opening narration is exactly what we're introduced to in a much more visceral way with Anton's first crime that we see, which is murdering the young police officer in the jail. And I'll talk a little bit more about Javier Bardem's performance and how intense and horrifying it is and how frightening he is as a character. But I just want to finish this point about immediately knowing what this film is going to be about and how they continue to expand upon that throughout the film. I think it's a great accomplishment to be able to do something like that, to be able to tell your audience what this film is about, but then still not reveal too much so you're still interested in it. You know thematically kind of where the film is going, but you're still, as an audience member, you're still expecting certain things to happen because it does have this Western feel, even though there are certain things that are out of place. You want it to follow this Western pattern, and it does, for the most part, do that in many ways. It has your cowboy, Llewellyn Moss. He's kind of your hero, but not. You have your sheriff, and you have your villain. But throughout the film, and I'll talk a little bit about different points in the film that do this, your expectations are subverted. Not only because they're mixing genres, having some crime and thriller aspects, but also because they are specifically changing aspects of tropes that you expect to shock you and to take you out of it and kind of keep you on your toes throughout. You cannot talk about No Country for Old Men without talking about Javier Bardem's performance and the character of Anton Chigurh. That's because, like many great films that have a hero and a villain in genres like Western, superhero films, so much of the story hangs on having a great villain and the role of the villain, what their motivations are, how they affect the heroes, how they affect the story, and what their goals are, what are their motivations. I think Anton Chigurh, Javier Bardem's performance is iconic. It's dreadful, it's scary, it feels real. He's a psychopath. He's crazy. At times you think he has a code that he lives by, then he breaks that code. One thing that you can say about him is that when he's in a scene, you feel like someone is gonna die. You never know what his next move is, because even though he pretends to have this coin flip rule, for example, or some sort of a moral code, he will kill someone in one scene, or when it's the administrator at the mobile home park where Llewellyn lives, he doesn't kill her. So you don't even know, you can't even predict. It's not just like, yeah, I know he's going to kill everyone in every scene. He's keeping you on your toes. But beyond his actions, it's his demeanor, the way he's portrayed, the performance that's brought out from Javier Bardem from the very beginning. To go back to this first crime that he commits, I was completely in shock. I was shook when he kills the young police officer in the jail. We see this scene a lot in films. is typically, someone, they sneak up from behind, they're handcuffed, or they have a rope or something, and they're going to strangle their adversary, whoever it might be. But I've never seen it performed and shot in the way we see here. There's just something so graphic and intense in his face. Like that shot of him just on the ground, he kind of pulls the cop back. They fall backwards on the ground, and then the shot comes in from above, showing his face. He looks manic. He looks insane. It's almost like he's entranced in this action, and immediately, like, this is someone who is not to be trifled with. This is someone who is going to be dangerous, menacing throughout this entire film. Okay, but what about Anton Chigurh's haircut? He's got to be the scariest character to ever be rocking the mom bob of all time. And I actually saw a little bit of behind the scenes or an interview with Javier Bardem talking about the haircut, and he was saying how in the book this character isn't really described that well physically, so they could really go anywhere with the character physically. And I think it's hilarious, but also impactful that they chose this absurd haircut, not just because it's funny, it looks kind of silly, but also because it's very out of place, and I think goes along with, in general, how he looks compared to all the other characters. He's got this weird haircut. He certainly dresses a little differently than everybody else. He's very distinct everywhere he goes, and he carries around this very strange weapon. He doesn't carry a gun like you would expect most other people in Texas in a Western film to be carrying. He carries this very deliberately cattle gun, I'll call it, that shoots air out. And it's not only, and because it can do more than a gun, you can see him shooting locks out with it. It shoots somebody in the head with no bullet, which makes it hard for them to conduct forensics on it. But in terms of the imagery of the film and setting the tone for the film, it again makes him menacing because he's mysterious. And not just mysterious in the sense that, like, oh, we don't know what he's about. They don't really talk about his background, which is true. But mysterious in the sense that I've never seen that before. I think most people have not seen a villain carrying around this sort of mechanism. Before he even uses it, you don't even know how he's going to use it. But then when he is using it, I think it adds to the fact that he's just different. He's not something you've seen before, and that ties in thematically to the film's idea that the world has changed. The old West is dead. And in this new world, there are dangers that you've never seen before that are difficult to comprehend for people like the sheriff, and chaos that does not follow these traditional lines, these traditional paths. And I want to touch on one of the most iconic scenes from this movie, and that's the coin flip scene in the gas station with the gas station attendant. We see here what we think, or what we might assume at that point, that he's going to use this coin flip to determine who lives and who dies, kind of like a Harvey Dent Two-Face style thing, some sort of code. He's a psychopathic killer, but he'll leave it up to chance, right? He'll leave it up to chance. He'll flip this coin. But I want to talk about a couple things in this scene, not just the device of the coin flip, but also the way that this scene is so tense. It goes to the performances, not just of Javier Bardem, who gives an amazing performance here, but also of the other actor who plays the store clerk, and also the way the scene is shot. One of the shots that really sticks out to me is that shot of the candy wrapper just slowly expanding. It's that kind of a thing that really increases the tension. It's kind of like how you would say, oh, you could hear a pin drop. In this sense, that candy wrapper expanding is our pin drop. We have this back and forth between the very confused store clerk and the very menacing Anton Chigurh, and he keeps saying, call it, call it. And the store clerk doesn't understand. He's saying, I haven't put anything up. What's going on? Again, it's not going along the traditional path you expect, but then Anton's explaining everything that has happened in his life has led him to this point. The coin has traveled 22 years to get here, and he is now calling it with everything on the line, meaning, I don't think the store clerk gets this, but if he gets it wrong, he will die. And I think Anton's basically saying that all of the choices that he's made in his life, any rule he's followed, any philosophy he's had, has led him to this point, this confrontation with Anton. And Anton almost sees himself, certainly seems to see himself as this kind of vessel for fate, even though obviously he's actually just a crazy man. But I think he kind of sees it as, if all of the things that you've done have led you to this point, with me going to kill you or considering killing you, then what does that say about all the things that have led you to this point? But there are a few things in the scene that add to the tension beyond just what's being said in the dialogue and those performances. There's the way it's shot, like I said, things like the pin drop of that candy wrapper expanding. It's also one of the few times in the film that uses a score, that uses any music in the background. One thing you may not notice while watching, and I will say I didn't notice while watching, at least I didn't actively notice, was that this film generally lacks a score. There's almost no score throughout the entire film. And I think that does a couple things. Number one, it makes the film feel incredibly realistic. In the real world, there's no score. Yeah, there's music sometimes in the background. You go to a restaurant, there's music on, obviously. There's music on. You put music on in your car, but there's no score in the real world. It's not like, oh, something intense is about to happen, and I know it is because I can hear, the music from above, like, oh my goodness, if I turn this corner, something dangerous is going to happen because the music is increasing. In the real world, you don't hear this music that kind of cues you in, and we don't realize it. I mean, it's part of the entertainment, but generally you're being cued by music to feel a certain way about a certain scene. It kind of it adds to the scenes usually, like, okay, I know this is supposed to be a light scene, this is supposed to be a love scene, this is supposed to be a scary scene, this is supposed to be an intense scene, right? You hear the Jaws music, you know that it's impending doom. In this movie, almost no music, no score. So it feels realistic, and I think that really adds to the tension and why this movie feels so relatable, in the sense that you could imagine being in that situation and feeling those same things and hearing those same sounds. Like, your senses are being engaged in a realistic way, so you can really experience it along with the characters. But like I said, this is one of the few times they use a score, and it's very little, very low, but you can hear this sort of hum. It's low, but it kind of like increases a little bit as we get closer and closer to him calling in, revealing the coin. So I think that use there is very deliberate to kind of show just how high the stakes are in this moment. And I think it's used well here, but I do really appreciate the lack of the score, even though obviously, like anybody, I love a good score, but I think it really does set this film apart, and it was a very deliberate choice by the directors to do that, to kind of leave it be realistic. I think that's what helps it feel so grounded throughout the entire movie. And another thing that sets No Country for Old Men apart is the way that it plays with genre. It doesn't fit neatly into any particular genre. You could say it's mostly a thriller. You could say it's mostly a crime noir. You can say it's mostly a Western, but it really doesn't fit into any of those perfectly. That's why people use the term neo-Western for it. In fact, it's trying to subvert the Western genre in particular. So I want to talk about a few points as to how we as the audience experience that subversion. And I think one of the key ones right off the bat, and which we've already discussed, is how Anton is not your typical villain. He's not using your typical weaponry. He doesn't look like your typical villain. He doesn't really act like it. We don't know what his background is. We don't know what his motivation is beyond, he was hired to get this money, but we don't necessarily know what his code is, even though he feigns a code in a way by using this coin flip, for example. We do know that he will kill you if he's committed to doing it. So we do know that he'll keep his promises. That may be the only thing he does, but even then, he killed his employer for hiring somebody else, hiring another group of people to try to find this money as well. So he's not exactly honorable or loyal in any sense. He's kind of this agent of chaos and disaster wreaking havoc on the land. Another way that this subverts our expectations of what we might see in any of these genres is our hero, or at least one of our heroes who we follow for the majority of the film, Llewellyn Moss. He fits the standard hero mold for these films in many key ways. He's a cowboy in a sense. He's a hunter. We're introduced to him hunting. He's got his cowboy hat on. He looks the part. But then he immediately comes across this drug deal gone bad. And we might think, okay, he's going to be the hero. He's going to figure out who did this. He's going to have a confrontation with the bad guy, whoever killed all these people, or in some way figure out who's behind all this and do that. But what he actually does is very different than what we might expect our hero to do. He actually finds the money, the $2 million in the case, and he just takes it. It's kind of an indicator immediately that, okay, we already have seen who our villain is. He's not exactly what we expect. We are now introduced to this character, this cowboy, who's going to be something of our hero. He's not exactly what we expect either. So again, we're thrown off. We're not sure where this is going. We have Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, our other key main character, who again kicked us off with the narration. He's also not exactly what we expect. He's an older sheriff. He's grizzled. He's not exactly the gun-toting, gun-slinging lawman who's going to go confront the bad guys necessarily and do that. He seems tired. He seems exhausted by this job, and that's not exactly what you'd expect. But I think it's impossible to talk about this film and the way it subverts your expectations without talking about the final, let's say, 30 minutes of the movie, when we find that our story shifts from following Llewellyn Moss first for a few scenes. And this isn't that unusual. We followed the sheriff a few different times, along his investigation, but we start following Sheriff Tom Bell towards the end, where he says to Carla Jean that he can protect Llewellyn, he can help him. And so she tells him where they're going to meet, and there he goes on his way to El Paso to find Llewellyn. And that's where things get very interesting, very different, very abruptly shocking. He doesn't find Llewellyn. Well, he finds Llewellyn. He doesn't find Llewellyn in the way we expect, where maybe, they'll team up and they'll fight Anton. Instead, he comes across the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of a shootout, because the Mexicans have found out where Llewellyn was from Carla Jean's mother, and they killed him off screen. That's it. He's killed off screen. And I'll be honest, at first I was like, is that really him? I turned to E. I was like, I don't know, was that Llewellyn? Then I was thinking to myself, all these crazy things that you might see in a movie. Well, maybe he faked his death, and the purpose was to kind of throw off Anton, and he talked to the sheriff in advance, and maybe that he'll actually, in the next scene, it'll be revealed that he is alive, and he's just going to go under the radar to track down Anton, and Anton's going to think he's dead, so that's how they're going to do it. But after a few more scenes, especially Carla Jean reacting that he was dead, establishing that he had passed away, that we just didn't see it. It settled in. The shock settled in. Like, okay, wow, the hero of the story, presumably, even though he's a little bit morally ambiguous, is dead. They just killed him off screen. We didn't see that big showdown that we were expecting. I mean, we did see a showdown between Anton and Llewellyn, but that was kind of felt like the rising action of the story. Okay, here's their first encounter, one face-to-face encounter. They're gonna have a shootout. He injured him. They're both very injured. They're gonna go their separate ways, and they're gonna come back for an ultimate climactic battle. No, he's just killed by a whole nother set of actors, the Mexicans who were on his trail as well. He doesn't even have the fight with Anton, and now we're left to wonder, well, then who is the hero? Who's gonna defeat Anton? What's going on here, right? And as it turns out, Sheriff Tom Bell isn't that either. So we think maybe the sheriff will be that character. He's an older guy. Maybe the whole point will be him finally reestablishing order, kind of like the old days, like we expect from these types of movies. Someone's got to reestablish order and defeat this chaotic actor. So that sets up the ultimate confrontation, or lack thereof, between Anton and the sheriff. You see the sheriff, I think one of the best shots of this confrontation is when he just decides to go in. He's going to go into the motel because he had a hunch that Anton would return there to the scene of the crime where Llewellyn died, looking for the money. So he opens the door, and that shot of him standing obscured in shadow in the doorway, one thing that you can really see specifically is the way he deliberately takes that step forward into the motel room with that wide stance. It's very much like you would expect in a Western, like here comes the hero. He's going to stand off against the bad guy, and you just expect, Anton's in there, so you think they're going to have this shootout. This is how it's going to be resolved. That's not how it's resolved, because Anton just runs away off screen, and that's it. In a way, the movie doesn't even have a climax. And I'll say two things about that. One, I think that helps make it a great film. Great in the sense that it's artistically impressive, it's thematically powerful, it sends a message, and it accomplishes it by shocking the audience and subverting expectations. It also made it less enjoyable just from the sense of having fun at the movies, I'll say. There wasn't this massive epic ending, or even like a small scale but intense ending, this confrontation. It kind of ended with a whimper. You have Anton is just going off on his merry way. He's severely injured from the car accident, but he just kind of goes off and continues, presumably, to live the life he's been leading with all this chaos, sowing destruction and mayhem everywhere he goes. You have Llewellyn is just dead, and the sheriff is retired. He's done. He's defeated. He failed. So yes, it ends without kind of this climactic moment you might want out of this movie, and I think it accomplishes what it's trying to do, which is great in the sense that it definitely sends a message. It's a movie you don't forget. It's telling the audience this is, not to just use the title, No Country for Old Men. The old ways are gone. The old classic hero you expect, the classic showdown you expect, the step-by-step process you might expect for a movie like this to happen is not going to happen anymore. It doesn't fly in the modern world. Now you have the depravity, you have the chaos of an Anton Chigurh type who represents that in one person. But I think the film is also telling us not to romanticize the past, in the sense that maybe what we think the past was is not what it was. Things have kind of always been this way, and these old notions are just that. They're just notions. This romanticizing that Sheriff Ed Tom Bell does in his narration at the beginning when he says, they didn't even carry guns. It was a different world, basically. Maybe that's not true. And maybe now that you live the experience and that you live your own experience in the world, it's just saying it's not that the world was innocent, it's that you were innocent. It's that you didn't realize the world was the way it was. And I think that purpose of all of these things that I've talked about. And there's definitely way more in this film than just what I've talked about here. But I think all of these things culminate in a message that, while not necessarily escapism, or maybe it's the reverse, like reverse escapism. You know, a lot of times you go to the movies and you're going there for escapism. It's for fun to watch a movie. But I think this movie is doing the reverse. It's going to bring you in on this premise that this is going to be kind of like a crime, like a Western. Like, yeah, it's going to be entertaining, and there's going to be a bad guy and a good guy, and there's different types of things. Even morally ambiguous characters are interesting, and they'll draw you in. And then at the end, it's like, boom. There's no boom. There's no big climactic moment. And then it makes you think, well, this is what it's been telling me all along, that this is not like what I'm expecting. It's different. The world is different than maybe what I thought it was. This movie is not just to go and escape from the world, it's to reflect the world. The world is chaotic. The world is dangerous. There are actors like Anton. There are morally ambiguous people. Most people are morally ambiguous, and we kind of are left to grapple with that as an audience and think about, well, what does that mean for the real world? Not just what does that mean for Westerns and these types of films, but what does that mean for the real world? What is it saying about our world and the true nature of our society? And I don't have an answer. I think the point of the film, one of the main points of the film, is just to force the audience to grapple with that, to draw you in on all these expectations that you go into a movie like this, and then at the end to kind of spit you out and say you didn't get what you wanted, you got something to think about. But again, overall, I think it's a great film. I definitely recommend giving it a look. It stands apart from many films for the reasons we've discussed and many others. And I will say thank you for listening. This is my first ever Reels on Wheels Movie Club Movie Monday. So if you're still with me, definitely appreciate you checking it out. I think this will probably change a little bit over the course of the weeks, I think, as we spend more time together with these films. So definitely stay tuned for more of this series. Just to give you a heads up, I am in New Orleans right now, and like I said, I'm trying to tie this into our travels. This film was set in Texas because we went to Texas. We're going to be returning to Texas shortly, so I have kind of a slate of films that I kind of want to talk about while we're in Texas for several weeks. But this week, I'm going to kind of just break off that path for a little bit, and I'm going to look into a New Orleans film. So be sure to check back in. I'll post on Instagram, Twitter, and on our website what the movie of the week is, rvleaguers.com. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check us out at RV Leaguers, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Let me know your thoughts. Check out our YouTube channel for more Reels on Wheels and for travel videos. And let me know your thoughts. Like I said, the whole point of this is to kick off a discussion, hopefully, about these movies. It would be great. I think I'm not the only one that wants to learn about these movies and just learn about films in general. So let's kick off a discussion with questions that I think are open to interpretation about this movie. The first one is, do you think Anton Chigurh has a code? Another question is about the genre, and I know I've touched upon this and I said it doesn't really fit neatly into any particular genre. It kind of subverts your expectations. But my question to you is, what genre do you think this movie is in? And my last question is, did you like the ending? Let me know what you think at RV Leaguers, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're at RV Leaguers on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us and subscribe for more Reels on Wheels and RV Leaguers adventures.